This is lecture week 2, the last part of the lecture for this week. And in the last part of this lecture, we had talked about the Social Security Act of 1935 and the various programs that were implemented as part of the Social Security Act of 1935. And we'll take a close look here at some of the different programs. And so you see here, Title I is Old Age Assistance. I was talking about these state pension programs that were emerging during the Progressive Era. What the Social Security Act of 1935 did was it essentially consolidated all the different state assistance programs for seniors into one program called Old Age Assistance. Now, Old Age Assistance doesn't exist anymore today. It's become a part of Supplemental Security Income. Supplemental Security Income provides assistance or payments, income payments to aged, blind, and disabled populations, but this was the very first name given to our Supplemental Security Income program, so that's Title I. You see in terms of Title II here, you see Old Age Insurance. That was, of course, the very first name given to our Social Security program. We added a survivors component, so OAI. This is the acronym is OAI at this time, but OAI became OASI by 1939. We added a survivors component. So that's Social Security. Title III is unemployment insurance. That remains unchanged. Title III still unemployment insurance. And then Title IV is the very first name given to our welfare system, aid to dependent children. Now it's called TANF, of course. TANF replaced this entitlement program. And then we have various other titles. So we have some shifting around. But think about the scope of all the different programs that were passed. This was massive legislation, as you can see. That's passed as part of one piece of legislation. So this is the legacy of the Social Security Act. This is primarily what we study in this class. So all these different programs. And so you'll notice that these programs, they're either insurance programs typically or assistance programs. So this is the organizing schema that we use. In terms of classifying, in Lecture 1 we talked about classification and how we organize all the different programs that are out there. Well, we use the structure that came out of the Social Security Act. Some programs organized around insurance principles. Other programs are organized around public assistance principles. And so we'll take a closer look at what that distinction entails. This social insurance versus public assistance distinction. So first, before we dive into the specifics, just some general characteristics about social insurance and public assistance. So generally speaking, social insurance programs will be larger in scope. And that's both in terms of the number of recipients of social insurance benefits and also in terms of the amount of money that we spend as a government. The amount of government dollars that are spent on social insurance programs are much greater in magnitude. And if we're thinking about trends over time, social insurance payments have increased over time. The federal government spends more and more on social insurance payments over time, and that amount increases rapidly throughout the last decades. But public assistance programs, federal government spending on public assistance payments have decreased significantly over the last few decades. So we have different trends. And then a final note about public assistance programs. So we're starting to go more towards administering a public assistance program to the tax code. What was once at the federal level, we moved to the state level, and now we're moving more and more towards the tax code. And just generally speaking, this is nowhere more apparent than, let's say, our new healthcare system. And you've all heard of the individual mandate or the employer mandate, which imposes a penalty if you don't opt into some health insurance program, right? So more and more administration through the tax code is what we're starting to see in the way of our social welfare programs generally. And so we move to the specifics about social insurance programs. Typically, social insurance programs are going to be universal in nature. They provide universal coverage. That is, potentially anyone could benefit from a social insurance universal program, as long as you fall within a certain category of persons who may qualify. So as long as you're categorically eligible, that is, you've contributed over your lifetime, typically you're potentially eligible for social insurance programs. And in terms of financing for social insurance programs, it differs from public assistance programs. Typically for social insurance programs, it requires some sort of contribution. And so you have these dedicated taxes. You have these earmarked or dedicated taxes. We have very specific taxes that go towards specific purposes. So Social Security as one example. We have the FICA tax. Once we collect the FICA tax, that goes directly to payments for Social Security beneficiaries and also to the trust fund. So that's an example of a dedicated or earmarked tax. That characterizes social insurance programs generally. And then we have a couple of issues here. We have adverse selection, moral hazard. Adverse selection refers to a tendency of the highest risk individuals to seek out insurance. So one example would be health insurance. If we never had Obamacare, if we simply continued to leave it up to the private health insurance companies and the private health insurance system to administer health insurance in the U.S., what often happens is this adverse selection issue is that you have the highest risk individuals, that is, the sickest individuals seek out insurance, and those who are perfectly healthy, they don't seek out insurance. That's an example of adverse selection. And so you can imagine why the price of health insurance has been so expensive for us over the years, is that we had this private administration, and so it's just the sickest individuals coming together for purpose of insurance, which in turn makes the premiums unaffordable for those who actually want to try to purchase that insurance. So that's an adverse selection issue. And so it's thought that social insurance programs, generally speaking, they overcome issues of adverse selection because they force people into the program. Right? So our new healthcare system, we force people to get health insurance coverage, and if you don't, you're responsible for an individual mandate or individual responsibility payment. Or in the case of an employer, you have to make your employer payment if you don't opt in, and that's through the tax code. And so we've forced people to contribute into the system. And so the basic idea is that with social insurance programs, we overcome this adverse selection issue by forcing otherwise healthy people to contribute into the system that we're trying to protect against. And then we have a moral hazard issue. The moral hazard issue is a little bit different. It's basically suggesting that there's a tendency for people to overuse that insurance. Right? So let me give you a car insurance example. Let's say you have very generous car insurance, so that very low deductibles and very comprehensive coverage, such that let's say I'm a very bad parallel parker. I'm not very good at parallel parking, and so every time I parallel park, I run into the guy behind me and I get a scratch on my bumper. And so every time I do that, I want to keep my car as fresh as possible. I call the insurance company, I have them cover that cost without my insurance premiums rising, hopefully. That's a moral hazard issue. Every time you have an opportunity to use your insurance, you do so. It's an example of overuse, and that's what a moral hazard issue is. And so it's thought that with social insurance programs, you would overcome these issues of moral hazard, this issue of overuse. Now, I would argue, in the case of health insurance, our new health insurance program, our new healthcare program, that we've done a good job of addressing adverse selection. That is, we have these individual responsibility payments and employer payments, but we haven't done as well a job in terms of addressing moral hazard. So there's still the tendency for people to overuse their insurance that we haven't addressed so much. And that's largely up to the individual insurance companies to account for moral hazard. And they typically do so by adjusting the deductibles, by adjusting the premiums paid, and also the co-payments to incentivize different uses of the health insurance. And so that's some basics about social insurance programs and their characteristics. So in short, with social insurance programs, you have programs that are government operated, certainly. We don't leave it up to the private market to administer these programs. They're government operated. And we have universal coverage. Potentially anyone can benefit in the way of social insurance. And then we also overcome issues of adverse selection and moral hazard that are thought to plague private insurance programs. And so we have some examples here of different social insurance programs. We have Social Security. Our old age survivors insurance is the formal name of our Social Security program. That's an example of a social insurance program. Disability insurance, which might be thought of as part of Social Security. We can simply add the D after the S, so OASDI. Disability insurance, another example of an insurance, social insurance program. Medicare, certainly, is another example of a social insurance program. Unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, these are state laws, not necessarily federal programs, but state programs. These are also examples of social insurance programs. This is just, you see behind me here, some arguments for a preference for social insurance programming as opposed to public assistance programming. That is, these are arguments for why we should organize our programs around insurance principles as opposed to public assistance principles, and just a couple examples. It helps us with caregiving responsibility. That's one example, especially for the people in the sandwich generation where they're caring for both the elderly, their elderly parents, and their kids. What would we do if we didn't have a program like Social Security? It would make it much more difficult to take care of our caregiving responsibilities. And then there's the argument that the work effort, we don't necessarily impact the work effort via social insurance programs because often these benefits are temporary, especially in the way of unemployment insurance. We have temporary assistance, and so social insurance programs in the way of unemployment insurance, we're not incentivizing people to work less, right? We don't have an impact on the work effort. So just a couple examples of arguments for why we should organize our programs around insurance principles as opposed to public assistance principles. And then we have on the other end of this continuum or this dichotomy, we have public assistance programs that have different characteristics. So public assistance programs are typically means tested. If you've heard of the term means tested, it means that the government will check your means or your financial well-being to see if you qualify. Right? So you have to have low income and/or assets often. So some programs require an asset test, others don't. But you have to be poor essentially to receive benefits under a public assistance program. And the method of financing is largely different for public assistance programs than for social insurance programs. With social insurance programs, we saw that they were financed through dedicated taxes, very specific taxes going towards specific purposes. But with public assistance programs, they derive their funding from general tax revenue. So the taxes that we collect in April of each year, that general revenue is used to fund or finance public assistance programs, and that's different from social insurance programs, obviously. And then I had suggested before that we often distinguish between entitlement programs and non-entitlement programs, and so I give you examples of some entitlement programs, entitlement public assistance programs and non-entitlement public assistance programs. That is, there may or may not be an obligation on the part of the government to provide assistance. And so first is supplemental security income as one example of an entitlement program. If you're found to be eligible under SSI, the state, actually it's a federal program, the federal government must provide you with assistance. And then Medicaid, if you're found to be eligible, if you're found to be poor, if you're found to be eligible under a state Medicaid plan, the government must provide you with health insurance coverage. Another example of an entitlement program. And then we have food stamps or SNAP, supplemental nutrition assistance. In Illinois, we call it the Link card. You have an electronic debit card that's provided to you. If you're found to be eligible, the government must provide you with assistance. And then you have some examples of non-entitlement programs. Our welfare system, TANF is an example. CHIP, Children's Health Insurance Program. This is a supplemental health insurance program that we have that people don't hear about too much, but it's a non-entitlement. If there are insufficient funds, there's no obligation on the part of government to provide you with health insurance coverage under the CHIP program. And then, of course, Section 8, our housing voucher program. Our Section 8 housing voucher program is an entitlement of is an example of a non-entitlement program. There's no obligation on the part of government to provide you with affordable housing, so therefore it's non-entitlement. So that wraps up this lecture on the history of social welfare policy and the organizing schema that we use for this class in the way of social insurance versus public assistance.